Good morning. It's great to see so many people here bright and early. I know you all traveled from many different directions to get here. So as you could see, I'm presenting this as a vision talk. It's not a technical talk, but as a neuroscientist and neurologist, I'm going to try to give you some of my insights into how what you do so amazingly might benefit our brains, and a little bit in reverse, how our understanding about the brain and its learning and its plasticity might benefit what you do. So that's my goals. We don't have a lot of time today to dive into the details, but if anything, I hope it inspires you to look further. And we'll have, I'm planning this so that we have some time for Q&A as well. I want to start with what I have been thinking about all the time lately, and I'm going to use that as a jumping off point for this discussion. And that's this concept of enhancing cognition being a global challenge. I recently looked up the list of global challenges, several different groups that present those, including the UN, and this is not on any of them. Now, I just want to be clear, I'm not talking about increasing the amount of information or knowledge in the world. I'm talking about the core of what really defines us as human, our ability to perceive, to think, to feel, and then to act. And this challenge, I would say, is up there with things like climate change, because if we can't elevate how our minds operate, then we're never going to wrap our heads around the type of problems like climate change, which are long, time delayed, and very abstract to people, not going to affect them directly. It's a pervasive challenge, right? So young people, education, should not just be about transferring of information content, a system that started at the Industrial Revolution, but really improving the information processing systems of the mind, wellness, improving all of our brain function and maintaining it throughout our lives, and then my world, neurology and psychiatry, improving function when we have deficits in our cognitive abilities. When it comes to improving these abilities, and just to make it explicit, I'm talking about a perception, memory, attention, emotional regulation, decision-making, and at the very highest level, our wisdom, compassion, and empathy. I would say we are tragically lacking. We have not prioritized these abilities, we do not assess them, and we do not target them to be improved. And so that really raises a question, how do we do this? Our medical system, we have an incumbent, a massive incumbent of pharmaceuticals, of drugs that we've been pursuing for 50 years as like a siloed approach. Didactic education, again, as transferring information, but not building the mind. How do we do it? So since we're all sitting here together, the topic is technology. How can technology and what you do help this process? I just want to pause for one moment and tell you that technology is not without its own complexities when it comes to the brain. I published a book last year called The Distracted Mind, Ancient Brains in a High-Tech World, really discussing sort of from an evolutionary perspective the strengths and the weaknesses of the human brain and how technology has really aggravated interference that we have, and it impairs our performance. I'm not going to talk about that anymore. This is a feel-good type of talk, but it's out there, and I think it's worth noting. One of my friends, you might know him, his name is Jon Favreau. He's a Hollywood guy, producer, actor, director. He did Jungle King, most recently did Iron Man. We had a couple stage presentations about virtual reality and storytelling. And he says, I want to find the humanity in the technology. And I really wanted to get this point out here. I think that this is a perfect group to share it with. I think there's a pivot point in technology, especially here in Silicon Valley, where we start thinking about how technology either enhances what makes us most human or degrades it. And I think in 10 years, when we look back, it'll be this time right now that those decisions are being made across the entire tech domain. Machine learning being a classic example of where I think that thinking has to advance, right? Just because it exists doesn't mean we have to build it. And this is something that will take thought and care. Doesn't mean that profit should not be driving companies. I get the bottom line. But I think that this is a really key moment to start being thoughtful about our development. And it's appropriate time. So in addition to machine learning and AI and all the deep learning algorithms that we're all very excited about, there's also an explosion in the consumer domain of virtual reality, augmented reality, motion capture, and wearable physiological devices. I know this audience is well familiar with this, but the world doesn't necessarily know that this is going to be coming full force into their lives over the next 5 years. And most of this is really positioned entertainment, media, and communication. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think there's really amazing opportunity here to use this technology and the technologies that already exist, coupled especially with machine learning as an approach, to make this very bold, lofty attempt of enhancing our cognition. You probably get, just intuitively, you might, without a neuroscience background, how this is possible. Obviously, the devil's in the details, but the basic premise is that this technology can be used to generate very powerful and targeted experiences. And experiences are the driving force of our brain's plasticity. The ability of our brain to modify itself at every level, its structure, its chemistry, its physiology. Experience is not the only driving force of plasticity. Damage and injury also drives plasticity through compensatory responses. But we know, this is a non-contentious point in neuroscience, that experience drives plasticity, and it does not end as we used to thought after critical stages of development, but continues throughout our entire lives. We know how strong this relationship is. There's so many examples. I think the most powerful one is that you could witness, not talking about shrapnel in your brain, but witness a single tragic event and detrimentally impact the function of your brain for the rest of your life. We call that PTSD, a post-traumatic stress disorder. So if experience can drive such a negative response to the brain, such an enduring negative response, the question is, how do we create new technologies or leverage existing technologies to build powerful, targeted experiences that maximally harness the brain's plasticity to enhance our cognition, refine our behavior, and ultimately to elevate our minds. I think that's a really amazing tech challenge. There's another lesson here. As we learned about experience and plasticity, there's many interesting lessons that could be learned about how the brain does modify itself in this dynamic, recurrent system that's constantly evolving. And I think, from my understanding of machine learning, and we do use it in our lab a lot, I'm not a personal expert in it myself, but there are going to be very important points here. So I encourage you to interact with neuroscientists as much as you can to understand how some of these lessons of the plastic brain might pertain to your own programming and your own work. All experiences are not created equal. This is where we get to work together. The experience that I think is most powerful for improving cognition, I would describe as a closed loop system. I know you're all familiar with it. How I describe it to lay people as a closed loop. You intervene in some way. You record the impact of that with as low latency as possible, ideally as close to real time. You use that data to then refine your intervention. You apply, you record, you cycle over and over again, at each pass becoming more targeted, more personalized if it's a human closed loop system, to changing whatever it is you're trying to do. Our current medical and education systems are completely open loop, right? You take a drug, you go home, you subjectively monitor your effects and your side effects for months, you go back to your doctor, they go up or down 10 milligrams, right? That's the art of medicine. Completely open loop, ineffective system to change anything, nevertheless something as complex as the human brain. Same with our education system. You take a test, it doesn't update your knowledge of that information, it just maybe places you in the next grade, used in a way that's completely divorced from you as an individual. We don't have many closed-loop systems in biology to change the brain. How do we do that? Well, what we discovered, our insights around 8 years ago, is that a perfect way to use technology to create closed-loop systems are through video games. So video games, as I don't have to explain probably to this audience, are very powerful interactive media that engages, it's immersive, and it drives behavioral change. How do we think about video games in a closed-loop system with the brain? So here's a little cartoon, and then I'll show you where machine learning fits into this. Here's your brain. You're playing a video game. Your behavior can be recorded as real-time performance metrics. The most obvious ones are how fast or how accurate you are, but there's much more complex ones that could be recorded. In real time, the software records this data, and then in a closed loop can feed back an updated environment such that the challenge is appropriate to your abilities. So whether you're 7 or 70, have autism, early Alzheimer's, or high-performing 40-year-old, you don't have to enter that information. The game finds your ability in that moment, challenges you appropriately right on that edge, where it's not so difficult that it's frustrating, not so easy that it's boring. Our game developers that we work with would call this the flow zone, right? When you become detached from time, deeply engaged. This is the most fun type of domain to play a video game, and we think it is the optimal place to harness the brain's plasticity. And then this is a perfect opportunity to bring in other new technologies into this loop. Motion capture, physiological devices, facial recordings, what we would define as multimodal biosensing. We now have the capacity to capture much more detailed information about a person in the moment and feed that into the game engine. We can also use advances in augmented reality and virtual reality to create even a more real-world experience, which we think will drive the change further. This is where machine learning comes in. So what we're looking at here, if we're successful, is a truly integrated multimodal closed-loop system. This does not exist yet in this full complexity. To have a system that records such complex information, all with different time signatures, different signal-to-noise ratios, to integrate them, to use data from large databases to make predictive decisions about how that data defines that person's brain and physiology in the moment, and then to use that to guide a complex system that challenges them, I think is amazing machine learning opportunity. And we have started with this, but at a very basic level. So I think that's something that hopefully is interesting to you and something that we could talk about further. I just want to give you one real-world example of this from our own research. In 2008, I had this idea of building a closed-loop video game to improve cognitive control abilities in older adults. So for around 10 years, I've been studying how attention, working memory, task switching, multitasking decline as we get older. The other thing we found is that there's a common underlying neural mechanism that underpins all of those abilities. It's a network that connects the prefrontal cortex with the rest of the brain. And so the hypothesis was that if we could challenge multitasking in a closed-loop setting, we could drive change in other abilities that we were not directly training. And so this is how you play NeuroRacer. You drive a car on a road, very attentional, demanding, going left, right, up, down to maintain your position. At the same time, you're making very accurate, rapid decisions to these target signs. Green circles, not red pentagons, not green pentagons, which are much harder to not press to. So what's happening here is we have two independent staircase adaptive algorithms. So pretty simple psychophysics. Each of them are driving the challenge appropriate to that person's ability. As you do this, as you navigate better, visual motor tracking task, the road goes faster. As you do the sign task better, a visual perceptual discrimination task, your response window becomes less. Well, we realized that if you were to play this game, NeuroRacer, whether or not you're aware of it, you would trade off between these tasks. It's actually very hard to engage in them both at the same time. That's not what we wanted you to do. We actually wanted you to multitask on the game as best as you could. So in order to do that, we simply tether across these two tasks with a reward cycle. You don't level up in NeuroRacer unless you get better at both tasks. One thing we learned is that everyone, including 80-year-olds, want to level up on video games. It's just an innate part of being a human being. And so that is NeuroRacer. It's a weaving together of real-time challenge adaptivity and feedback to drive the brain's plasticity. Again, I would say that there's lessons here from the machine learning, in the machine learning field about how we drive this type of change. What we found here, I'm just going to give you one data slide, is that if you look at multitasking performance as recorded on the brain, as recorded playing the game, a 0% means that you multitask perfectly. It means that you do the sign task just as well when you do it alone versus when you're driving at the same time. And what we found is that 20-year-olds, despite the belief that they are multitasking masters, suffer a 27% decrement when they dual task in NeuroRacer. Now, we already know that 80-year-olds suffer a much greater deficit when they multitask, because we have dozens of papers showing that, as well as the neural mechanisms behind that change. The question was, what happens? Do you just preserve this ability at a high level and just suffer this massive decline when you're 69 years old? Or do you suffer this decline every tragic year of your life, which is what happens? So this is the change that occurs across the lifespan. What we show here is with something as dynamic and immersive as this video game, not a super high-level video game, but constant visual stimulation, constant motoric stimulation, we have the ability to have a very sensitive diagnostic measure. So again, the closed loop is not just a way to potentially change the brain, but a very accurate way to read out performance. As a matter of fact, we show that the biggest difference between two adjacent decades here are between 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds. There are very few, if any, diagnostic measures that can actually separate between those age groups. Here, even in a study that's not very large, we're able to show that difference. We also show that neurally, what's happening here, I'm not showing that data just for the sake of time, is that the prefrontal cortex is engaged during this task, mostly at the most challenging moment in the game. So if you time lock the EEG signal and look at a measure known as midline frontal theta, this is a low frequency burst of activity from the frontal cortex. And you look at what happens, a young adult, a 20-year-old, has a burst of power at that frequency domain that peaks around 300 milliseconds in and then decline, back at baseline in 800 milliseconds. We also see that theta coherence, and I'll talk a little bit more about coherence, across the brain is also engaged. This is decreased with age. Both the rapid, how rapid this engages, the topography, as well as the duration of this activation of the prefrontal cortex and its networks decrease with age, and this is associated with the decline in performance. What we find is that if we have older adults play NeuroRacer for 12 hours over the course of a month, 1 hour a day, 3 days a week for 4 weeks, and bring them back, this is what we find. We find that their ability to multitask on the game improves to an extraordinary degree, even exceeding that of 20-year-olds. We find signs of functional plasticity in their brain. Their coherence across their brain improves. The peak of midline frontal theta increases. The other thing we find is that this does not decline after 6 months without reinforcement, without a booster. So this is an enduring change in how their brain functions. The other thing we find is that we confirm their hypothesis. Their attention, they're on a very boring, very different task called the vigilance task, TOVA, as well as their working memory, short-term memory for faces, even in the setting of distraction, even when multitasking improves. And probably the most important thing was that another group of older adults that played NeuroRacer, but did not play it in multitasking mode. So they did the sign task and they did the driving task, but never together. They showed no improvement in their ability to multitask and no improvement in their working memory or sustained attention. So it wasn't just playing the game for 12 hours or any game. It was this interference challenge that drove the plasticity of the brain and led to improvements in other abilities that were not directly trained. That's where the transfer was. That was the active ingredient, to borrow a term from the drug industry, in this type of interactive experiential medicine. We published this in the end of 2013 in this journal in Nature, which was, for us is as good as it gets as scientists with this lovely pun of game changer. But it really has tortured me for the last 4 years, largely because it forces me to message to the media constantly that I don't know if this game is a game changer. I mean, the future will only show that, and I'll show you where the game has gone. But what I hope is the game changer is that a group of scientists get to work with professionals in a completely different industry like the game industry, where you have, a totally different skill set, where you could create something that neither group could do alone. And then you do a careful placebo-controlled trial with neural metrics to look at endurance of those effects and the mechanism behind them. And if we're ever going to move things from what sits in the entertainment domain now, including all of that other technology I showed you, this is the route. It takes a long time, it's expensive, companies don't often engage in this, but I think that this is the path forward. I also realized that we could not actually produce a scalable product at UCSF. It just wasn't the environment. This is not really a game product, it's a prototype of a game. In order to create it as a game, we had to move it out of the lab. And this was another interesting lesson for me. How do you build intellectual property? How do you create a bridge between academics and industry? And so I started a company with friends of mine at LucasArts at the time and a group in Boston called Akili. And Akili is interesting. So they have an exclusive license on the patent that I filed that's owned by UCSF. And now they created a much better video game. Much tighter closed loops, multiple closed loops working across many different domains, great use of the cloud, both on the server side as well as analytics, and a high level of art, music, and story. Again, deep engagement and immersion is now apparent to us as a driving force for the plasticity, not just lightly engaging with the task, even if it activates those networks selectively. The sort of polarizing thing about Akili is that you can't download this game, right? It's not on the App Store. This game is now going through multiple clinical trials to validate it at the very highest level of regulatory approval as a diagnostic and therapeutic tool. So again, another really exciting opportunity for the type of engineering that you do is creating an entire new class of medicine. All of these conditions are in research phase right now, many of them yielding really exciting results. Depression, multiple sclerosis, autism data, all very exciting at phase 2 level. What we're most excited about is our ADHD trial. So we now have just completed a phase 3 registration FDA trial of this video game. A phase 3 is the trial that you do right before you submit to the FDA. It's a double-blinded, randomized control, multi-site trial done just like a drug study. That trial is done. We're waiting for the data. It's all blinded. Those people are sequestered. Probably the most frustrating time in my entire life is right now until next month when the data is revealed. If we hit our milestones, what we'll be looking at is the first FDA-approved non-drug treatment for ADHD and the first prescribable video game. So where we're positioning and where the FDA thinks of this as an entirely new class of medicine, right? We've been dominated for 50 years by really one type of medicine. You ask people, what's medicine? Some people will tell you drugs. They're not wrong, but that is incredibly powerful marketing. I mean, medicine does not have to be drugs. It is a way of improving health. And so this, as a digital medicine, where the active ingredients are exactly what you do, that type of rapid reinforcement learning and deep learning, that all can drive this type of interactivity with a system that understands you in a way that nothing else can. That's the really exciting opportunity that I wanted to make sure I got to share with you. Back at the shop, my lab at UCSF was completely transformed. No one wanted to do basic cognitive neuroscience anymore. Everyone wanted to do this sort of next level, bridging the gap between technology, and I really mean here non-invasive, consumer-friendly technology with neuroscience to build tools to better assess the brain in a more real-world way, as well as to change the brain in a way that's meaningful and enduring without all the side effects that we currently have in our treatments. Just want to give you a little peek at what our center looks like. It just took us an hour to get here. It could take 40 minutes without traffic, but it's on the Mission Bay campus. We have our own MRI scanner. We have the ability to draw blood and to do all the things that we would do in a normal neuroscience research lab. But this is what our lab looks like, one of our 3 labs now. So on this side, we're looking at the experimental room. You would come in there and engage in an experiment as a research participant, while on this side is our control room. So we build all of our own interactive media in-house now, and we challenge people with it, recording as much as we can about how they are performing and their physiology in real time, with the ultimate goal of using that data in the closed-loop system to try to drive their improvement to the next level. We're obviously really interested in mobile and wireless technology. The accessibility aspects of it drive us, right? So the fact that we can't get doctors or teachers into places in this world, but we can get devices, and soon everyone will have a Wi-Fi connected device in the world. And it's not just the devices, but also physiological recordings. We are just really on the cusp now of being able to do high-level EEG recording with wireless devices in people's homes so that we could track plasticity in a much more granular way than we ever have before, all time-locked to events in the game. So these have been really high-level technology challenges that we're just beginning to overcome, and the options are amazing, right? To have this degree of resolution in the physiological domain that can then be used to guide that experience. Here's a study we're very excited about. It's a game that we created, a meditation-inspired video game played on an iPad called Metatrain. And these are foster care children in India playing this game, so we have a very at-risk group to improve their attention abilities. So again, an incredible opportunity from a global level to distribute this type of medicine broadly. We also have this all around classrooms all around the Bay Area. So again, closed loops using algorithms, machine learning algorithms, but at a pretty simple level to rapidly sample cognitive abilities across all of the domains. What we're doing here is just trying to understand how these abilities, these basic abilities of working memory and sustained attention, selective attention, task switching, emotional regulation, how they map onto standard academic performance, like reading and math. We don't really know that yet. There's this massive rift between the education world and neuroscience that needs to be filled. And so this is, again, another really exciting opportunity outside of medicine, but using similar technology. What I'm not going to spend time on now, but I just want to let you know, is that we've spent the last 4 years building new video games. All of them targeting different aspects of cognitive control, all of them bringing on art, music, and story, aspects that we don't think are superfluous, but we think are core to creating this closed loop experience in a deep enough way to change the brain, and using many new technologies that are still in development, and as I said, many are in the entertainment domain. So from motion capture, I'll just tell you about this one. Body Brain Trainer uses multiple closed loops, not just in the cognitive domain, but in the physical domain. So in Body Brain Trainer, pictured up at the top, you are challenging yourself both physically and cognitively at the same time. While we're challenging you cognitively, we're changing the demands just like we do in all of our games. But in Body Brain Trainer, you also wear a heart rate monitor. So based on a VO2 max done beforehand, we set your ideal heart rate, and the game senses that in real time. And then if your heart rate is below goal, it just increases the amplitude required of your physical responses, drives your heart rate up. If it goes too high, it just titrates it back. Again, closed loops working across multiple domains, interacting in ways that are very unpredictable. So again, massive opportunity for the type of engineering that you do. And then of course, bringing in virtual reality and motion capture in lots of exciting ways is where we're heading. Now, we don't think that any of these are going to be a holy grail, right? We don't not want to step in the same footprints of the pharmaceutical industry and build silos around every single treatment. I think this will come together, something I call neuro CrossFit training in the future, where you will go into a center, get a very deep dive into your physiology, your brain, your behavior, and then be essentially prescribed a collection of games that target you and then change with you, using these algorithms to constantly update themselves based on their understanding of you in the moment and their detection of changes of you over time to keep you at a high level. And then we do a very, very deep research dive, and that's what we're doing now. We have 5 longitudinal trials. So what it would look like if you came into our lab to do a study is you get an MRI to look at structure and function of the brain. We get EEG to look at spectral dynamics in the context of cognitive challenges. But we also now do stress testing. We have you take home devices and do sleep monitoring. We do blood work looking at telomere length and telomerase and inflammatory markers and hormones. We do physical fitness testing with VO2 max if we think that's going to change. Essentially, any aspect of your physiology that may change, we record and see how it changes over the course of training. Again, we don't have the tools to take all of this data into a common space and use it in a meaningful way. Again, incredible opportunity sort of in the sensor domain when it comes to humans, not just cars, right? To be able to understand us in the moment. And so that is the direction that we're heading. I just want to conclude, talk a little bit more about the brain, and talk about this incredible opportunity to advance everything I described to you to the next level, which presents even a greater machine learning challenge for ourselves. So video games, we adore, right? Because they activate the brain selectively. They activate networks in a way that we have never accomplished with a molecule. It just has never happened. With the closed loop system, we could put pressure on that, but we think that there's an opportunity to then use neural data to drive this to the next level. In order to do that, we need real-time brain recording. And so what you're looking at here is a technology we created with many different groups, also working with NVIDIA and using CUDA-enabled programming. And what you see here is my brain. There's my glass brain. It's a combination of an MRI image. So the blue is the cortical surface. The golden fibers are known as the white matter that connect different brain areas. And overlaid on top of this is real-time EEG collected with 64-channel wireless EEG. It's so basically within 200 milliseconds, we're doing Fourier transformation, so each of these colors represent a different frequency domain. We're doing artifact correction. We're doing source localization using that MRI data to get a better localization. And we're doing multivariate Granger causality. And what that does is it looks at coherence, taking into account latency lags between brain areas to form a statistical model about how brain areas are communicating with each other. So this is real-time EEG data, and largely now it's a proof of concept that we could do it, but this is just an incredible challenge from a research point of view of how do you manage all of this real-time data. We have never accomplished this in neuroscience. All of the neuroscience data you read is an average. What we do is have someone do the same thing for 80 times and then average it together. All the noise disappears and a signal emerges. What we want to understand is how the brain is functioning and changing itself in real time. And I think that the opportunity for machine learning to be used to make sense of this, to build a model based on everyone's brains and to understand you and how you change over time is great. I also think there's an incredible opportunity to learn about plasticity that could apply to better machine learning programming also by understanding the brain in real time. So this is a very bi-directional opportunity that has not happened yet, right? It is just all out in front of us. Where do we go with the glass brain? Two directions right now. How can it be used potentially as a real-time diagnostic tool to understand the brain and how it's changing? And then eventually, how can it be used to ultimately close the loop? So I have an example here that I want to share with you. This is Mickey Hart. He's the drummer. Oh, we don't have sound here, but there's drumming sounds going on. So Mickey Hart is the drummer from the Grateful Dead. He is wearing an Oculus Rift and a 64-channel EEG cap. This is after I gave a keynote at the NVIDIA GTC conference, so you probably know what that looks like. And this stage is so big you can't actually see all that's going on. But Mickey can't see the audience. He's in his virtual world playing a game we created called Neurodrummer. So his world is over here being displayed on the screen. This is Tim Mullen, an engineer that worked with us from UCSD. And what you're looking at here is Tim's virtual world, which is the inside of Mickey's functioning brain. So what we have here is sort of like a virtual reality neuro-nested dolls. Tim inside Mickey's brain, Mickey inside his own virtual world. Can a future exist where a therapist sits inside his patient's brain with a virtual dashboard, challenging them, flying to different brain areas, looking at how it's responding? I don't know. But it is technically possible and an interesting way to think about how we can understand someone's brain, our patient's brain, our partner's brain. I know my wife is getting nervous right now. Okay, so I'm going to conclude with this, and then we could discuss anything that you find interesting here. 2017, if you have an attention disorder, as I said before, whether you're 7 or 70 years old, you will get one of these, which is a sledgehammer. It activates neurotransmitter systems that are spread throughout the brain, and so you get side effects. And we have to boost those doses high enough to get the effects that it causes the side effects. We think that pharmaceuticals may play a role in the future, but at a much lower dose. That one day medical students, maybe even in 10 years, will look back and think we were barbarians for the doses that we used to treat things like depression and anxiety and attention deficit disorder. Then we could use a tool like ACE, and ideally NeuroAce. So you go home, you do your assessments, you understand what part of your brain needs to most be improved, and then you are prescribed, if it's a clinical condition. If not, it could be assigned in school or something you do after school to challenge your brain, multiple games, to activate those networks selectively that most need to be improved and to put pressure on them. Then the glass brain comes in. If we can understand the brain in real time, based on our larger understanding of everyone else's brain and your brain where it started, we could feed that data into the game engine. What this allows us to do is to drive the rewards and the adaptivity, not just based on your performance or other aspects of your physiology, but how your brain is functioning in the moment. So if 3 of you played one of our games, you may have exactly the same score, but you may have different limiting features in your brain. It could be visual processing, motor processing, attention abilities. If we know where the processing limitations lie, we could target them directly to optimize them. We think this will be like a gamma knife approach to improving brain function. It's a research project right now and just a hypothesis, whether or not we could drive more selective improvement by using neural data in real time to guide the game challenge and adaptivity. The other direction that we're going with the glass brain is this direction. What we're now showing, we just published a paper last year, that we could stimulate the brain with alternating currents. So this is known as transcranial alternating current stimulation. This is a mobile wireless device that also has the ability to record brain activity simultaneously with stimulating it, although that is a very complicated artifact challenge, but you could certainly do it in a sparse way where you stimulate, record, stimulate, record. What we find is that if you stimulate the brain at low frequency, at theta, let's say 4 hertz, across the frontal cortex, and you play our game NeuroRacer, you will become faster and more accurate only if we stimulate your brain and at that frequency. That's a recent paper that we published. We can drive the endogenous brain rhythms in a complex way, not just at the theta range, that leads to an increase in performance. I know that sounds like science fiction. I did not believe it myself until we performed it and replicated it, but this has been showed in other domains as well. If we could capture real-time data, we could use that to guide the stimulation parameters. And so what we wind up with here, eventually, is a targeted, personalized, multimodal, closed-loop system. And because we always favor consumer-friendly devices that could go into people's homes, for the first time we have something that's real-world and real-time. So this is the incredible opportunity I think we have to change multiple conditions that people are suffering from. So right now, all of these clinical trials are underway to understand how, even if they don't reverse the underlying pathology, they could create stronger brains to resist the negative consequences and delay the effects later in life. And then, of course, the biggest win is to take this even beyond medicine and build new approaches to help all of us as education and wellness tools. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Adam. We have time for questions. So does anybody have a question?
Adam, thanks. Does that work? Yeah. Thanks for the fascinating talk. This is quite interesting. I was curious about two things, right? One, how do you reconcile this potential treatment with the existing treatment? So let's say multiple sclerosis, for instance. There are treatments that are specifically targeting a reduction in kind of myelin loss or, some of those kind of aspects. How would this reconcile in the future? And a follow-up question on that is, what does the evaluation look like in these cases? I mean, do you do placebo trials with other random games?
Yeah, it's perfect.
And,
great questions. Both great questions. So the first one, we have no idea. No one knows. This research hasn't been done. We really do not understand how an interactive experience like this then integrates or either synergistically or any other way with our standard treatments right now. Almost none of that research has been done. So how even a small dose of an attention-activating drug that works on the cholinergic system or a drug that affects myelination, for example, in our MS studies right now, how they interact together. There are many research studies that show that physiological changes, functional changes, can even change amyloid, right, the pathological precursor or involved in the Alzheimer's pathway. So there's an entire domain of research, an entire field of the interaction between experiences and pharmaceuticals and other existing treatments. Completely wide open. How we do our studies is, so we do placebo-controlled studies. For almost the entire history of this type of research, no one has done true placebo-controlled trials. We do that now. And how do we do placebo control? So for a drug trial, it's really easy because you take a pill that you don't know what it is, although they're often confounded by the fact that that pill might make you nauseous, in which case you know. But let's just say under the perfect conditions, you don't know what you're taking. The reason it's a placebo control is really because you have matched expectations across the two groups. Expectation drives improvement, even if you have cancer. That's the amazing thing about the placebo effect. It is the power of your mind improving your health. That's what does it. So what we do is we do a study beforehand with another game that we do not think has active ingredients in the domain that we're trying to improve. And then we do a whole test to determine if expectations by the people in those studies are matched on how much it's going to improve the outcome measures that we're testing. And then we have a placebo control. And then through complex sort of shuffling, we do double blinding as well. So we design our trial with the FDA. It's the first of its kind, and we are able to do full out double blind and randomized control trials with an interactive experience.
Perfect, thanks.
All right. While we're answering another one or two more questions, could the folks who are actually going to be presenting in the first round of oral presentations come down here and get mic'd up? Okay, any more questions? Let's go right here.
Hi. This, as you've demonstrated, is very powerful, but what is the substitute for individuals who don't like to play video games?
They're out of luck. Who likes to play video games here? Come on, let me see a raise of hands. This is not necessarily for everyone. Just like taking a drug is not necessarily for everyone. I certainly don't want to present it that this is the savior of all mankind. This is a new approach that should be in a doctor's toolkit that will be appropriate for some and not others. And it's also not meant to be something that you play all the time at the exclusion of, exercise and dating or whatever else you need to keep your brain healthy. It's meant to be it's meant to be dosed like a drug. Like, in our ADHD study, you play the game for 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, and the game locks you out. So unlike a drug where you can overdose on it, you can't overdose on our game, we could control the dosage, and we could also monitor compliance. So it certainly won't be for everyone. But what we find is that it surprisingly, and maybe not so surprising to people that are in this type of games for impact field, is that with the appropriate art, story, and music, you could target games to almost anyone. And that is way broader than we ever thought about video games in the past. Sure, it's true, first-person shooter video games do have a population that tends to like them, but we now know that games are played by 51% women compared to 49% men, and we know that the average age of a gamer is over 40 now. Not just young gamers like myself becoming older, but we're targeting different populations. So I think that's going to continue to shift.
Thank you.
One last question.
You mentioned this doesn't replace working out. Where does it fit into someone's daily life as like, I can just take a pill in the morning and I'm done with it versus this, it's like, is it like once a week therapy? Is it something I do like right before school every day? I'm sure you guys are doing tons of research into that as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is, look, we wanted the pill. We invested multiple billions of dollars around the world to get the quick fix for our depression, our anxiety, and attention, and it has failed. Everyone knows it's failed, including the pharmaceutical companies. Actually, pharmaceutical companies are the biggest investors in Achilles, interestingly enough. This is a therapy that you have to work for, just like the old days when you had to work for these improvements. And so what we want to do is figure out the minimal viable exposure to the game to get the benefits. We don't know what that is right now. Right now, as I said, it's 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week for just 1 month. That's the protocol in our ADHD trial. Over time, we'll figure out how low you can go. Also, we don't know when you have to boost it, how long it will last. There is so many fundamental questions that we have no idea as to the answer. But first, we have to get over that hurdle of entering, this new category of medicine, and then figuring out the details is the way to go. But, think about how much time people spend in the gym every day. Like, people will do it, I think, if we could show in a careful way that there are meaningful benefits.
All right. Excellent. Well, thanks a lot, Adam. This
Thanks,
has been
everyone.
great.
Thank you.